Hi all, I'm Andy, and the purpose of this video is to use this chart I've put together to explore what we know about the way the different types of caffeine make us feel, or how we experience them in our mind and body, rather than just the stimulant or wakefulness effect. This will probably make sense to those who are caffeine sensitive, those who feel the effects of caffeine quite acutely or strongly. Importantly, this video and the chart I'm featuring are what I've been able to come up with. I think this topic is incredibly understudied and underreported. Caffeine is apparently the biggest drug on the planet, and yet there is so little discussion about our perception of the substance. Another reason for this video is to ask about your experience of caffeine, and also to hear from anyone who can point me in the direction of any studies exploring the topic that I haven't found yet. Hopefully I'll get enough feedback and pointers to quality research to be able to update this video in the future. Anyway, I'll do a brief introduction for a couple of minutes on the purpose behind this video and the chart. But if you'd really rather jump straight into the chart with the information, then skip to the time I've indicated at the bottom of the screen. So we all know caffeine is a stimulant, but I want to focus on any perceived variations we notice or sense, because apparently we can experience them quite differently. I'm going to do this partly by discussing the four main caffeine types, meaning the caffeine and paraxanthine in coffee, the theophylline in black and green tea, and the theobromine in cocoa or cacao. And that's right, there are several different types of caffeine, and they occur in different quantities in different beverage types. Plus, I'll mention some other mediating substances or active ingredients, if you like. And also, for a little more context, I, for one, am a very caffeine-sensitive person. I can easily notice differences in the effects of each of the popular caffeine types, and what I've read in the research on these substances strongly confirms my own observation of each type. Does this leave me open to confirmation bias concerning some of the studies I've found? I think yes, to some degree, but I'll honestly try keeping it to a minimum. I will sprinkle the chart explanation with some of my own observations, and I'd really like to hear about your sensory observations. So please go ahead and comment on your experience. Now lastly, before I get started on the chart, there is not a large body of quality scientific literature on the subjective experience and perception of caffeine. I've searched the study database as best I can, and the content is not super extensive. So this is my attempt to express what I have picked up. I would very much like to hear about any quality literature on this topic, so please go ahead and mention anything you've found in the literature that could add to what I've found. I would like to update this video once in a while with fresh information. So here's the graphic I've made, and let's start on the left with coffee. The caffeine and paraxanthine we get from coffee bring increased alertness and wakefulness. That is, people who are caffeine sensitive feel more awake and attentive after consuming coffee. Let's call it the default cognitive sensation we derive from caffeine in general, and the one we associate most strongly with coffee. It's usually described as a clear, energized focus. People who can sense the difference from other caffeine types say it's a clean sensation characterized by mental sharpness. It's the one you consume if you want to be able to focus very intently right now, or at least within a short period of time. It's also considered to be the most potent of the group. You generally don't hear people say they need a strong tea or some chocolate now when a demanding mental task is at hand. It's also why we sometimes say we're wired from a coffee buzz. There is a sensation of being locked into a straight track or attached to a powerful tractor beam. I hope that doesn't sound too excessive. but it is how some of us feel. Now, the downsides of standard caffeine and paraxanthine we get from coffee are the often reported anxiety, jitters, restlessness, and even dizziness, particularly at higher doses. And this won't come as a mystery to many. I have to be careful with that too. Too much caffeine and paraxanthine from coffee feels pretty awful, and even worse, once it's in your system, it's next to impossible to get rid of until it naturally metabolizes out of your system. I'm going to leave coffee for now because it's probably more meaningful to accept coffee caffeine as the default sensation people are familiar with and refer back to it as a point of comparison to the other types. But notably, coffee contains all four of the stimulant chemicals, just in different proportions to the other beverages. Let's move on to green tea, where theophylline is the stimulant chemical of interest. The weight of dried green tea leaves is typically made up of around 1 to 2% theophylline. This is much higher than with coffee or cacao beans. Green tea also brings many of the effects noticed from coffee consumption, but there are several key differences. Firstly, particularly the alertness and focus effects are somewhat less intense. People will say that while they definitely notice they are more alert than without, the feeling is somewhat subdued. It's not as strong. It is alertness, but it's less intense. It's as if we can have the wakefulness and focus, but it is more pleasant and relaxing. We can be stimulated and yet relaxed at the same time. Is that a contradiction? Possibly. But there's a very good reason why, and it's this. Green tea contains significant amounts of the amino acid L-theanine. So this is probably the best example of a mediating substance, like I mentioned earlier. L-theanine is not a stimulant, and possibly the opposite. It promotes relaxation and reduces anxiety. This, combined with the caffeine and theophylline in green tea, can lead to a balanced and elevated mood. That is the most common way the sensation of ingesting green tea is described: balanced and elevated. Let's also address the anti-stress effects of green tea directly. There is evidence in the scientific literature suggesting green tea reduces stress. This study from 2014 found that the ingestion of green tea inhibited the increase of a stress marker called salivary CGA. And this systematic review from 2017 found the combination of green tea caffeine and L-theanine improved self-reported relaxation, calmness, and reduced tension. That was just 2 papers, and on this subject, at least, there is a lot of research backing this up. And also, very importantly, many people report being able to consume green tea late in the day or even before bed and still being able to sleep well. For any caffeine-sensitive person, this is generally not possible with coffee. That's a huge difference. Now back to the relaxing effect. When I first discovered green tea when I was living in Korea back in the 90s, I was quite astounded at the difference from coffee. Relaxed and balanced, that perfectly describes my experience. I was sold. In fact, I had probably enjoyed a couple of cups of green tea on the day I was standing up riding a bus in Incheon. The news came over the radio that Kim Il-sung, the North Korean leader of the time, had just died. And honestly, the Korean people on the bus all looked like the blood had drained from their faces. That event brought on a time of profound uncertainty and insecurity. But there was I, super relaxed. Because of my green tea? I don't know, it was a very long time ago. Anyway, I digress. There's another thing sometimes attributed to this combination of theophylline and L-theanine: creativity. Some users report feeling more creative and inspired after drinking green tea, perhaps due to this unique combination of caffeine, L-theanine, and possibly other compounds found in tea. So next time I find myself having to write a sonnet or a love letter, I'll be dosing up on green tea. Who am I kidding? No amount of green tea is going to help me write a sonnet. Okay, let's move on to black tea. So I've made up my fancy chart and I've hit a bit of a problem. Although black tea is arguably the most consumed beverage on the planet, there is very little scientific literature on the subjective sensations experienced by drinkers. Whether or not black tea contains the same amount of the relaxing amino acid L-theanine as green tea would be interesting to know, because black tea is associated with stress reduction. But it does contain similar amounts of theophylline to green tea. This is the stimulant which is higher in green and black tea than it is in coffee or cacao. If we had more research literature to draw upon, we would be able to compare black and green tea and try to come to some conclusions about the effect of theophylline with less L-theanine mediating the perceived sensation. But unfortunately, this is not the case. Anyway, the consensus is that black tea brings a wakefulness and focus that isn't as sharp and clear as the caffeine in coffee. It's still there, very definitely, but with a smoother, broader effect. There is, however, evidence that black tea reduces stress and improves relaxation. This study from 2007, yes, it's a little old, suggests that ongoing black tea consumption reduces post-stress cortisol and reduces blood platelet activation, both markers of reduced stress. And yet, on the other hand, for some people with excess consumption, there can be adverse effects such as gastrointestinal issues, insomnia, and increased heart rate. Next is cacao or cocoa, however you like to pronounce it, and the food they're most often used in chocolate, which isn't discussed that often in terms of its caffeine content, and yet, depending on the product, it does contain plenty. And caffeine-sensitive folks can let you know that dark chocolate in particular can give quite the potent buzz. While cacao contains a small amount of caffeine and more significant amounts of paraxanthine and theophylline, the standout stimulant in this food is theobromine, another one of the methyl xanthines and one with its own quirks. Theobromine typically makes up around 1 to 2% of the weight of cacao beans, making it the most abundant of the 4 compounds in cacao. Like caffeine, theobromine causes feelings of wakefulness and alertness, but to a slightly lesser extent than coffee. But this is going to depend on dose. It is reported, and I have personally experienced many times, that large amounts of dark chocolate can also cause an intense perceived sensation of alertness and focus. Although, like theophylline in green and black tea, theobromine is less likely to cause jitters or anxiety in most people, which can contribute to a more pleasant subjective experience. And here's another observation I've noticed myself, as well as observing in general reading on the topic. When the cocoa mass and cocoa fat remain together, such as in a very dark chocolate, the sensation of enhanced focus is very strong, clear, and clean. However, if it's just the cocoa mass, otherwise known as cocoa powder, such as in a hot chocolate drink, the sensation is duller and weaker. Some people have hypothesized the cocoa fat somehow increases the assimilation of the cocoa mass, where most of the caffeine resides. Maybe because theobromine is fat soluble and therefore peaks more slowly in the blood, while caffeine, which is water soluble, peaks after only 30 minutes. Theobromine requires 2 to 3 hours to peak. Importantly, the theobromine in cacao is a vasodilator, improving blood flow and oxygenation to the brain. which in turn can boost mental clarity and concentration. As a vasodilator, it is available as a prescription drug in some places, used to treat respiratory conditions. Cacao beans contain a lot. They contain flavonols that increase blood flow, which can conceivably affect mood. They contain phenylethylamine, which plays a role in promoting feelings of joy and happiness, as it stimulates the release of the endorphin hormones. Cacao also contains tryptophan, which is a precursor of serotonin, a neurotransmitter known for its role in mood regulation. Increased serotonin levels are often associated with improved mood and a reduction in depressive symptoms. However, the theobromine in cacao and chocolate is precisely the substance that is very harmful, even fatal, to dogs, cats, birds, and black bears. Well, there it is. I'd love to get any kind of feedback on this information. And as I said before, please don't hesitate to mention any useful literature in the comments. Hopefully this topic will be investigated to a much deeper degree in the future. If this information was useful, then please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Have a beaut day, and I'll see you in the next one.